first names or last names. Those last.
Alrighty, we're going to go ahead and get started. Can you guys hear me okay? Okay, I'm probably not going to even bother with the microphone. Can everybody hear me all right? Or okay. My name is Andrews-Katz, and I'm going to be the moderator for today's panel. I'm going to start at the far end, the lovely lady in red with Yolanda, and we're going to introduce ourselves down. Go ahead, Yolanda.
Oh, introduce myself. I'm sorry. I thought you were going to do that.
I just know your name very well. So.
Okay. I'm Yolanda Wallace. I write for Bold Strokes Books.
And I'm Lou Silver, and I write for Dream Spinner.
My name is Karelia Stetz-Waters, and I write primarily for Grand Central Press.
My name is Christine Svensson, and I write under the name Isabella, and I own the publishing company Sapphire Books.
And I'm Eric Andrews-Katz. I work with the Seattle Gay News, and I also write with Bold Strokes Books. Alrighty, well, welcome very much to the first panel here of the day, or the second one, depending on how you count it. So we're for discussing romance today. So I'm going to start with Yolanda, and we'll go down this way for answers. How do you define romance writing?
Two people, they fall in love doing the book, you know.
Do they have to fall in love?
No, actually, no. As long as there are two people who have a connection. It doesn't have to be a romantic connection, but a connection of some kind. As long as two people meet and there's a connection, you know, that is my soulmate, that is my best friend, that is my something. It's romance to me.
Luke?
How do I define romance? To me, a romance book, at least in the way that we use that term today, thank you, is a book that involves love. It has to be love. It can be two people, it could be more than two people coming together. There's always difficulty to overcome, conflict, both within the characters and outside. And eventually they overcome that to the point where they have some kind of real bond, either a happy ever after, or as they say, a happy for now. And it's a kind of understanding that happens between those people.
Karelia?
I'm totally open to 100 different definitions of romance, but for me, I want the characters to meet on page 1, and I want a happily ever after ending that blows your mind with its happiness.
And Isabella?
I think my answer is a little bit different. I think for me, romance is that energy between two people who are involved and connect and have that connection. It may not be a connection for life. It might be a connection in that moment that leads to a sexual encounter or leads to something. So for me, that romance is that energy or that spark between two people.
Does sex need to be part of a romance novel? And we'll start with Karelia for that.
Yes. For me, it does.
Okay, Lou?
Yes, if it's a romance novel written for adults, it should have sex. Yep.
Isabella?
Always.
And Yolanda?
Well, leave it to me to say no. Because I do have one where there's no sex scenes in it, but there's you lead up to it, and there's after the fact. I just don't have an actual love scene.
Fade to black.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is the difference between sex writing and pornography in the action of the characters, the words chosen by the author, or the accoutrement used during the session? And we'll start with Isabella for that one.
Oh, really?
Or, of course, is it the interpretation of the reader?
No, I think it's the type of words that are used. The difference between porn and sex, right, is what you're asking me? Yeah, I definitely think that gooey, dripping kinds of words, really follow the porn venue. pearls or other things, nubs and purple prose. In my mind, are more porn venue. Using correct anatomy and instances, I think probably follow the sex. Using correct words for clit or a vagina or nipples instead of saying her flowery mound or her beautiful nubs on her breasts or things like that. Yeah.
So, in your opinion, would clit count as a pornographic word?
No,
then?
no.
So that still counts as part of the sexual, but
Yes.
using a different
Yes.
adjective, which we
If
don't
we're
have to go into, would be
squirting,
something
gushing,
more
or oozing, we're in the porn venue. Yeah.
gushing or oozing. Okay. Karelia, we'll just go down the line here on this one.
Every summer I take a drawing class, and my art teacher, and I'm very bad at it, but my art teacher always tells us this great piece of advice. She says, draw what you really see, not what you think you see. So don't draw what you think a tree looks like, draw what this tree looks like. And I think for me, the dividing line between porn and sexual writing, or just between good sexual writing and bad sexual writing, in my opinion, is that ability to write what you really see, an authentic experience that is unique to these two characters, not a sex scene that could be stamped into any number of situations that doesn't have that authentic reality to it.
Lou?
Well, I think the difference is about emotion and story. I think that if you have a sex scene in a novel, it can, and if I write it, it probably is graphic and will have drippy words and things like that. But there's emotion involved, either developing emotion and that's what the sex scene does, is help develop that arc of the romance, the character arc as well. So I think it's about the feelings that accompany the sex, and I also think it's about the way it's presented as part of a story. I think pornographic writing focuses strictly on the sex, and at least I think it does. And in using a sex scene in a novel, it needs to be part and parcel of that story. So that's where I think the difference lies.
I was at another conference a couple of years ago. Someone asked, what's the difference between erotica and romance? And I said, well, no, the difference between porn and romance, and I said, it's the quality of the music in the background. So it's the same thing with writing erotica or porn and romance. It's the quality of the story around the love scene. If you're just doing it just to have sex and just to get off, that's porn, obviously. But if you're doing it to expand the story and the connection between these characters, that's romance to me.
Eric, can we hear your opinion also?
My opinion. I have to default to the comedian that said sex is about two people and porn is when you involve the feathers of the chicken. The live chicken. In all honesty, my first two books, they cut away from the sex scene, although it's implied and it's there. I've gotten criticism both directions on that one. I think the pornography, again, it relies in the interpretation by the reader and, again, in the words chosen. I mean, you can say penis, you can say cock, and they're going to have two different images brought to mind when you say them, at least in most people, I should say. For me, it has a very distinctive difference. One I'd say to my mother, well, no, let's not try to say both together. One I'd say to your mother,
Fair enough.
and one I would say without any problems to my friends. So, I mean, that's the difference for me. It's the wording and the interpretation. Are there any sex or kinds of sex that's taboo to write about? We'll start with Lou on this one.
Oh.
Trying to shake it up.
Underage. I don't write about underage sex at all. Period. That's it. I personally don't write about any kind of incest. Right? Okay, so that's taboo to me, but there are people who will write twincest, but I don't.
Does that include in the words like daddy and mommy and things like that during sex? Do you avoid those words as well, or do you use them?
Most of the time. I mean, and unless there's some other reason that they're in there, I don't write sex that where it looks like one character is, even if that character is of age, is treating them as if they are underage.
Well, the words, at least for the male community, when they say daddy, it's not always an underage father-son play. So I'm just saying, do you use those type of words regardless, or do you avoid them because of the implications?
I have never been tempted to use them. So.
Okay.
No, I would use that if it was an appropriate word for the scene that I was writing, but that hasn't happened.
Okay. Yolanda?
For me, it'd be anything that's non-consensual. It has to be both characters have to want this. If one wants and one does not, I can't go there.
Yeah.
Okay.
So anything else would probably, well, like you said, underage, no, but anything else is fine.
Karelia?
I'd agree with my colleagues here. In the romance genre, I think if you get into the thriller genre, there's room to write about sex that is taboo. But again, I think it has to be written with a real attention to what would actually be happening in the lives of these people at that moment, which, if it is one of those taboo subjects, might be really, really traumatic.
And Isabella?
Oh, see, I write some erotica and fetish, so this is, necrophilia, non-com, incest. I think sometimes if you write YA, there is younger age sex at some level. Some people write that, so I'm not against that. We've published 2 books that way that had that in it, underage sex. But I think if it's not something, you'd tell your grandmother about, it's probably a good thing you want. With the exception of fetish. I have written a short story with a daddy, a lesbian who was a daddy, and had a boy. So, but not in the terms of diapers or anything like that. It's a submissive. It's top and bottom, right? Exactly. So, yeah, that's probably it.
It's funny you mentioned the necrophilia aspect, although I'm not advocating it, of course. If anybody here has ever read Poppy Z. Bright, there's a book that she wrote called Exquisite Corpse, which tells about a love story between 2 men, one who's a necrophiliac and one who's a cannibal. And the 2 of them hunt together. And I remember telling my partner that I was really disturbed because the scenes are written so beautifully and erotically that I was getting turned on until I realized, of course, what the hell they're describing. So it was really a conundrum there, but that's a different circumstance, of course. Right. That's a particular thing. So, and if anybody's taking notes, that was Poppy Z. Bright. She's a very twisted woman, but very good author. Okay, so going on to the next thing, which is probably a bad segue. We were challenged to write 2 minutes of extremely, basically hardcore sex, is something that would make us blush, I think the words were used. So we are going to start, I think, with Yolanda, and we're going to have 2 minutes to basically get you guys hot. And it will be 2 minutes to the time that I say go, because we're trying to keep this on a schedule. So, Yolanda, go.
And it's just 4 places, not that hard. But this is from my latest book, 24/7. And it's between a Mexican federal police officer and an American travel writer on assignment. Luisa Moreno didn't do things like this. She took risks on the job but never at home. And she definitely didn't pick up strange women in airport bars, or anywhere else for that matter. She preferred relationships, not flings. One-night stands weren't her style. But there's something about Finn Chamberlain that inspired her to do something completely out of her comfort zone. Her head told her coming here was a cautionary tale waiting to happen, but instinct said this was an opportunity not to be missed. When in doubt, she learned long ago, always go with your gut. She waved the key card in front of the door and waited for the light on the electronic sensor to turn green. When she heard the lock click open, she felt something inside her spring free as well. After you. She held the door open and Finn stepped inside. Lucy left her inhibitions in the hall as she followed the gorgeous Green into the room. I don't, she began, but Finn cut her off with a kiss. I know. Finn's hands rested lightly on Lucy's waist and gently began to rub her sides. Lucy could feel the heat even through the thick cotton of her shirt. But I do. Lucy placed her hands on Finn's chest and slowly slid them down until the heels rested on the rise of Finn's breast. So what happens next? You assumed the position, Finn said with a mischievous smile. Officer. Finn twirled a long tapered finger in the air, indicating she wanted Lisa to turn and face the wall. Lisa complied, not with the reluctance of a perp, but the eagerness of a lover. She placed her hands on the peeling wallpaper, spread her legs, and waited for the next round in an increasingly sexy game.
Okay, next I think we'll go with Isabella just to shake it all up. Okay. You need a few extra second, or you're good?
No, I'm good.
Okay, and Isabella, go.
If you were at Hugo House, you got the first part of this scene, so for those of you who weren't there, I'm sorry. Peeling Brooke's cat suit open like a grape, Luce pushed it barely past Brooke's shoulders, trapping her arms behind even tighter than the restraints had. She'd only unzipped it halfway, hoping to add to Brooke's torture as Luce worked her way around Brooke's overstimulated body. She ran her fingers over taut nipples and dipped her head to leisurely suck on one and then the other. Standing behind Brooke, she hefted a breast in one hand, pinching the nipples into submission. Luce ran her hands down her tight stomach, feeling it quiver as she slowly and gently glided back and forth over the muscles. She reveled in how they still responded to her touch. Falling to her knees, Luce rested her head against Brooke's abs. She threw her mask to the floor. Brooke's heady sexual aroma drifted up, sending Luce into a frenzy. Suddenly, she wanted to strip her lover naked so she could access all of her. Luce yanked the diagonal zipper the rest of the way to Brooke's left ankle and pushed the leather away. Sitting back on her heels, she surveyed the half-leather, half-naked Brooke standing before her. She was beautiful. She was exquisite the way she stood, her dignity never wavering. Even in a submissive role, Brooke had a way of holding herself that let the dom know she never acquiesced all of her power to them. Tonight, Luce was her dom. She loved that about Brooke. Luce wet the tip of her tongue and slid it up Brooke's thigh, stopping at the small strip of hair at her pubic bone. Splitting Brooke's labia with her tongue, Luce dipped between the lips, tracing over Brooke's hard clit. Each time she flicked it, Brooke jerked and then forced herself further onto Luce's tongue. Her body begged for more contact.
Alrighty, we're gonna go with Lou next. So, ready? Here is Lou.
Okay, I'm not going to introduce this because I don't have time. Rusty had woken up some hours into the night to find moonlight bathing the hut's interior. It silvered everything it touched, and the brightness seemed to compel Rusty to wakefulness. His cock pulled at his attention, straining toward Nate as if it had found a home. Rusty might have tried to mentally talk the unruly beast down, show it which head was running the show, but a draft stirred the air, and he caught Nate's scent, strong in his nostrils. They'd fallen asleep, lying alongside each other on top of the sleeping bags, covered with their thin blankets. Rusty hadn't wanted to break the connection with Nate, even if it had been nothing more than sex. They weren't spooning, not quite that intimate. Yet when he woke with the smell of Nate and sex permeating the darkness, he became a slave to it, couldn't seem to stop himself from wrapping himself around the man. He may even have groaned as he pushed his erection against Nate's prickly-haired thigh. Of course, Nate woke up, and before Rusty could even start to think or talk, Nate took his lips in a hard, biting kiss. Heat surged through Rusty, and he broke away to follow his nose down to Nate's cock, which was already leaking pre-cum and gleaming in the moonlight. The sight and smell of it entranced Rusty like a hypnotist's gem, and he lowered his mouth down to savor the taste. He knew right then that the memory of blowing Nate would be burned into his brain as one of the hottest things he'd ever done. When he could no longer stand the lack of friction on his own cock, he reached for it, but he didn't get through more than a few strokes before Nate moved, flipping around to a 69 position. In the past, Rusty always thought 69 sounded better than it actually turned out to be, but this wasn't like that. He was so entranced with the taste and feel of Nate's cock in his mouth that the slow-burning fuse centered at his groin was secondary, until it wasn't. He exploded at the very same moment that Nate's cum shot against the roof of his mouth.
Done.
Right.
And Karelia. Ready, set, go.
All right, this is from my story in Magic and Mayhem, the anthology for the conference. My perfect pairing is a tattoo artist and a soldier. Then she kisses me, holding me down, her hand on my sex, her tongue in my mouth. She handles me. I thought I would take the lead, that I would make love to her to redress all her hot desert days. We're only 2 years apart, but that's something when you grow up in a small town. Quarry Cove fixes you in time. Whoever you were at 9 or 11, you remain. It's a kind of immortality. But Cassie plunges her finger into me, and she is no one's little sister. She moves her fingers in and out. My hips lift to her hand. I feel how much bigger she is than me, how much stronger. She's a soldier, and I want that. The boys call me Butch and Mr. and Sir, but I am willow branches in her hands. I am spring trillium. She could break me, and she doesn't. And the woman in me wants that so much I don't recognize myself. I feel like such a girl, I whisper between gasps. She chuckles deep in her throat. You are. And she's gentle with me, which is what I need. And Eric, are you going to share something with us?
I will, and go. Zach is 60, Adrian is 48. Zach stretched across Adrian's body, reaching for the nightstand and withdrawing a condom and a small bottle of lubricant. He shifted his body until he was kneeling between Adrian's legs. He hovered over Adrian's thick cock and covered it with his mouth. As his lips expertly slid the length of Adrian's slightly smaller shaft, Zach's fingers deftly applied the lubricant to Adrian's body. Adrian let out a slow breath as Zach's fingers eased inside him. The muscles tightened before relaxing, enough to allow Zach a second entry. Zach's mouth worked Adrian's cock. His fingers continued deliberately lubricating Adrian's hole until they easily slid in and out. Zach braced Adrian's legs against his shoulders. He squeezed a handful of lubricant onto his hand and generously applied it to his thick, throbbing, condom-covered cock. Zach leaned down, positioning the thick head at the well-lubricated opening, and entered. Adrian gasped as Zach slowly pushed inside him. He initially resisted the penetration until his muscles started to relax. The instant assault immediately transformed from pain to pleasure, letting an electrical charge loose in Adrian's veins. His body welcomed Zach's cock, and Adrian felt the shaft sliding further into his ass. Adrian took another breath, completely succumbing to Zach's advances, feeling him fully enter his body. Zach held the position, grinding slowly until his pubic hair scraped and tickled the sensitive skin under Adrian's ballsack. He felt Adrian's body become accustomed to his cock's length and girth, allowing him further entrance. He leaned over Adrian's body, bending the younger man in half, pressing his mouth to his, and kissing deeply. Zach moved his hips slowly, with a rhythmic precision. Adrian's eyes fluttered closed. "Look at me," Zach commanded. "I want you here with me."
Well done.
Thank you. All right, so I guess this is a bad segue back, but they say the first rule of sex writing is to turn yourself on. How often have any of you, if ever, stopped writing a scene to take care of personal business? We'll start with Karelia. She has the biggest smile.
Pretty much always.
Lou?
None of your business. No, occasionally.
Occasionally, okay. And Isabella?
Oh, I think I've written after sex, not before. Yeah.
So you find the inspiration and then do the writing instead of recreating. Okay, okay. And Yolanda?
Well, let's put it this way. When I wrote Month and Sundays, it was about food and sex. We gained a lot of weight and had a lot of sex.
Didn't burn any of that off, huh?
No. Because you do it at the same time, it tends to Equal out.
At the same time? We'll just leave that to everybody's imagination.
Oh, you're not getting away with not answering that one, Eric.
Okay. Well, let's say I started off writing porn years and years and years ago under a fake name. And there was more than one time I went up to a very nice-looking gentleman and said, "How would you like to help me work through writer's block?" And of course, they were like, "What are you writing?" And I was like, "Why don't you come home and we'll discuss it?" And that's how I found out that some things are just not acrobatically possible. It looks better on paper, but it doesn't really work in real life.
See, you got to try it out first, then write it.
There you go. That's lesson learned. So, how would you describe the perfect romantic night for yourself by your own definition? And this is for yourself, not for your writing. Your own perfect romantic night. And we will start with Yolanda on that.
It's back to that book about sex and food. It involves sex and food. So have a wonderful dinner, have a nice bottle of wine, and then adjourn to the bedroom.
Not on the table?
Table's hard.
He asked me.
Hey,
He asked me.
and we appreciate the honesty. Okay, Isabella, we'll go with you next on this.
What was the question again?
For yourself, not for any characters that you write, how would you describe the perfect romantic night?
Honey, put your hand over your ears. Gosh.
I guess we should have a disclaimer that nothing can be held against anyone. This is technically a fantasy.
See, he asked me.
I think it kind of depends on the moment, what's happening. I've had sex in some pretty interesting places, so I think that it really just depends on that moment, what's happening, how you're feeling. We were probably definitely more adventurous when we were younger. So I don't think that there's a perfect night. I think sometimes the perfect nights happen by accident.
Okay. And Lou?
We're talking romance here.
However you define romance.
Well, you said romance rather
Yes,
than
that's the
just
word I
a
used.
sexual encounter. I think that it is a quiet night. No parties or not necessarily going out anywhere. I like firelight and moonlight and starlight, candlelight. I also like sunshine. Just throw that out there. Chocolate. There's got to be chocolate involved. Dark is good. And I think probably an element of spontaneity to take the romantic evening home to a wonderful sexual ending.
So you're implying that if you're taking it home, that everything else happens elsewhere?
No. I just meant.
Gotcha. Okay.
Taking it
Just want to make sure we
yes,
understood your words properly.
No, home is fine, for romance. I think home is where most romance actually occurs.
And Karelia?
If I get to have my perfect romantic evening, 17 years ago, I met my wife in the best gay bar ever. In the best lesbian town ever, Northampton, Massachusetts, which is so gay. I went to the VFW there, the Veterans of Foreign Wars Club, and it was gayer than Provincetown. I'm like, this is so wonderful. So I love that bar, and it has since closed down. But if I get my perfect dream romantic evening, I would go to that bar where I met my wife so long ago. I love the energy of being around people, being out, watching people, being around queers of all across the spectrum. So we would revisit that important place in our past and then walk home in the moonlight.
That's sweet.
Give us an example of what you consider to be a memorable romantic or sex scene by another author. So we will start with Lou on that.
I'm old and I have a very poor memory. But you know, and I can't give you particulars about a scene. I just can't, I don't have the ability to recall that.
Do you remember a particular author that?
Yeah, I really like Reese Ford's writing. I like the way she writes her sex scenes. I read this great book by Jamie Fessenden that was actually practically the whole book was sex scenes, but it was pretty lighthearted, but it was really well written. I loved the way he handled it. It was called I can't remember the title of it. It was about two college roommates.
Male, female, male, male, female,
Male. Yeah, they were really awesome. And then I don't know if it was a sex scene per se, but a long time ago I read this story by Audre Lorde, and I remember that after I read the story, I went and sought out my partner at the time. Come here. So that's another example.
Isabella?
One of my very, very most favorite authors is Jennifer Fulton, and I love her book Dark Garden. And I love the whole setting. It's very gothic setting, and she has a particular sex scene where the two main characters, Blake Cavendish and the other character, have sex on this spiral staircase. They have this kind of not argument, kind of sexual tension that's built up through the whole book, and then they have this awesome sex scene on the staircase.
Oddly enough, that's how Mae West claims to have lost her virginity. It's true. That's what she says in her book. So, on a stairwell. All right, Karelia.
So I was very lucky a couple years ago, and the Sarah Quinn of the bands Tegan and Sarah blurbed one of my books, so wrote the little praise on the front. And because she did that, she also invited me to come to one of her concerts and hang out with her and her bandmates after the show. And we got around to talking about books, because Sarah Quinn's got this long list called Sarah Quinn Reads, and it's all the books that she's liked. And when a rock star tells you this is a great book, you need to read it, like you really need to read it. Like lots of people give you book recommendations, but she said, you've got to read this book, My Education by Susan Choi. And that has, I think, the best sex writing I have ever read. And it's also, if you're a writer out there, I think it's a fascinating book, because we've all heard the saying, show, don't tell. And that book pretty much tells the whole story from beginning to end. And it is such vivid writing and so powerful. Even though I don't really like the thesis statement of the book, shall we say, like the message at the end, I'm like, ooh, I didn't like that. But dang, I love that book, because the writing was just so incredible. I definitely recommend it, especially if you are aspiring to write sex scenes yourself. It's fantastic.
And Yolanda.
I don't know the author's name. It's P.S. I Love You. I just like the idea of, after you're gone, you leave this series of letters to your partner to take them on a journey to help get over you. I just love that concept.
Okay, so do you think there's a large heterosexual readership for GLBT romances?
Yes. Actually, I'll actually take
Just go ahead and jump in. On this one, you guys can all just jump in.
Because I work at a bank in Georgia, and so Georgia's one of the reddest states in the country. But there's a secretary at a branch downtown. She found out that I was a writer. She's like, I want to get one of your books. It's like, are you sure? Because they're lesbian romances. She's like, I don't care. I want to support you. So I gave her the first one, and every time one comes out, when's the next one coming out? When's the next one coming out? So she's hooked on my books, even though she's a straight woman who's 60 years old. So yes, on that one.
I also say yes. I think that the readership is changing a little bit, but for a long time, for male in particular, the vast majority of the readership were heterosexual female readers. But
When you say vast, you're saying that more heterosexual female readers than gay male readers?
yes, yes.
Okay.
But I think that has changed. I think that it was once the genre started becoming more ubiquitous. Is that a good word for that? It started reaching more people, and yeah, I think that's changed. But I do think that at one time it was mostly female readers.
I write for an imprint that predominantly publishes heterosexual romance. And when I gave my lesbian romance novel to my agent, she said, well, she called it unprecedented, which we know isn't true, but in her world, it was unprecedented. And she didn't think that she would be able to place it with a publisher. So the fact that she did place it with a heterosexual publisher, I think suggests that there is an opening in the market, even in large mainstream publishing.
Isabella?
For my American Yakuza series, I heard from a lot of guys who read the book who were a little skeptical because they thought it was in the male genre. And I would get emails from guys who really enjoyed the book. I mean, there's some kinky sex in there, but they really enjoyed it. And I'm thinking it's probably because there's kinky sex in there. Yeah. But my son's girlfriends have read our books and love them. And every time they're pestering about when's the next book coming out. And I work in a college community, and a lot of my peers know that I publish lesbian romance and are always asking if they can purchase. And again, same situation, oh, I want to support you. Starts off as, oh, I want to support you, and then they come back and they're like, you got another book coming out? So it's very, it's very nice. But yeah, I think it's a changing market.
So does a mainstream GLBT romance novel need to be 100% clear and blatant about the relationship? And for example, I'm using things like fried green tomatoes. They never came out and said they were lesbians. It was heavily implied. We all understood. But does a GLBT romance need to have that spelled out, or can it be implied? And we'll just start from Isabella and work our way down this time.
Okay, I saw fried green tomatoes when I was younger, and I didn't know it was implied.
When you say younger, what age group are we talking about so we have an idea?
I was in my 20s. I was early 20s. I came out later in life, so I thought it was cute that they liked each other so much. It wasn't until I saw it a second time I'm like, oh, they're lesbians, of course. I think that.
Now, out of curiosity, did you see the movie or read the book first?
No, the movie.
Because the book's a little bit more clear about the relationship.
I have the book
so.
now, though.
Okay.
Yeah, I did get the book now. Yeah, I don't. No, I think you can have both.
Okay.
Yeah.
Philip?
The Gen X lesbian in me says I want to see a big old rainbow flag on the cover. But I'm also an English professor, and my younger students are often not identifying as lesbian or gay, even though that's what I would label them. They've almost moved past that label. And some of them have a plethora of other labels, and then some of them are like, I don't have any labels. So I wonder if we may even see the genre move through the label and into a kind of unstatedness, because our young readership is not even bothering to identify as this or that. They just are uniquely who they are.
I know you sleep with 300-400 men and right away you're labeled.
People.
Yeah, but don't you think they need the label for bookstores and libraries? And because if you get too ubiquitous, they're not going to be able to.
I want
That's
the
actually
label.
my next question that we're going to come to.
Yeah.
So, Lou, go right ahead.
I think the relationship between the protagonists needs to be clear rather than implied in this genre. And let me remind you that Fried Green Tomatoes is a wonderful book, but it's not in this genre.
You don't consider it to be a lesbian romance?
No. I consider it to be mainstream literature. Yeah. But it definitely has an element of lesbian romance, which is awesome. But I think in this genre, yes, the relationship needs to be clear between the protagonists. But I don't know that it has to have labels. I mean, you know, man loving a man, woman loving a woman, whatever. But that doesn't mean they have to say, you know, aloud, I'm gay, I'm a lesbian, you know. So, yeah.
Yolanda?
Yeah, that was my answer. I was going to say that long, you don't have to say, you don't have to label the relationship between the people, but as long as there's a definite relationship between those people. So you know that it's not implied that they're together, you know that they're together during the course of the book.
We should probably
Yeah, we
get
have
onto audience.
5 minutes left, so
Okay,
I just
awesome.
got the call, and I was just about to, did you want to do the Mad Libs, or should I open questions to the audience?
I'll have people. If you have a fantastic Mad Lib that you've written that is amazing, put your email address on it and drop it off to me at the end of. Don't move yet. We're not quite done. But drop it off to me at the end of the session, and we will thoughtfully choose a couple excellent ones and send you a free book. But how about some? Whatever else you got
I
on
have
your...
one more question, then I'll turn it over to the audience, and just kind of segues into what we were just talking about. As GLBTQ people become more mainstream, is it important to have a separate section in bookstores and libraries for example, GLBTQ reading and writing romance versus just a romance section and have it incorporated? Do we need to subdivide ourselves still at this point? Is it necessary? And we'll start with Yolanda and work that way, and then we'll turn it over to the audience.
We actually discussed that during the plenary session. We actually had a breakout. We said it should not have to be separated. Just actually put it in. Romance is romance. Just put it in with the romance. So we don't have to. Doesn't have to be a separate section now.
Hello?
I think there's two ways to look at it. I agree that it's, you know, it should not be separate, should not be other. I don't like that classifying it as something different or odd, or you know. But on the other hand, if I'm going to the bookstore and I'm in a hurry, I want to know right where to look. So, you know, I guess there's two ways to look at it.
I'm with Lou. As a writer, I want to make it into the mainstream. As a reader, I want a shelf of lavender-covered books that I can choose from.
Isabella?
As both a publisher and a writer, I just like to see more of our books on the shelf.
Yeah.
That's the bigger stick. Then we can have the discussion of whether we should be slotted as LGBT. But at this point, I just think we need to have more books on the shelf. So that would be my answer.
At this point, I'm going to turn all of us over to your mercy. And yes, sir.
Several of you mentioned about you like to have the story of the characters go through trauma and whatever and then come out with a happy ending. How would you do a story that had an unhappy ending, specifically in a military environment?
I was going to say, tragedy invokes romance and sentimentality as it is. So in a military field, I would imagine, although I'm not a military writer, that there would be a lot of opportunity to have a romance with a tragic ending or an unhappier ending than what the fairy tales usually depictate. That would be my hypothetical guess, because I don't write military.
I have
At
two.
this point.
I have two military, Always Faithful and Forever Faithful, and they both have happy endings. And I got a lot of feedback because I wrote a book that didn't have a happy ending, and people were so pissed off that the reviews reflected that. And it was reviews to the point, I loved this book until the last 3 pages, and then I hated it. So it was readers. You know, you can write your heart, and I tell authors that all the time. You can write whatever you want, but what the reader really wants to do after they've had this great, fulfilling book is they really do want a happy ending or a happy for now ending. So it's a fine line. It's tough.
I would probably market it under general fiction.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say too. It's the romance genre, specifically as it's used today, has that happy ending, you know. But there are a whole lot of books out there that don't have a happy ending. They're just not in the romance genre, generally speaking.
You never read Brokeback Mountain. It's a romance and it does not have a happy ending.
Well, it doesn't fit the romance genre.
That depends on how you interpret romance, I think. I think it's a very
It is a
romantic
it's
book. It's
very
not my particular style, but
romantic. Romantic isn't the same as a romance.
Wouldn't you classify that as a bittersweet then, and it needs to be labeled a bittersweet?
does it need to be labeled? I mean,
Yes.
generally speaking, does it need to be labeled as such?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was gonna Dream Center has
Okay.
like bittersweet novels, and they're specifically labeled. This is not your typical happy ending, but it's still a beautiful book.
So it's a general assumption that if it's a romance, it needs to have a happy ending? It's good to know. Other questions?
I'm gonna make a comment. You're gonna get a really bad review if you don't let me know ahead of time that it is a bittersweet, and I have written that in my reviews.
There's
Okay.
also just kind of thinking about LGBTQ stuff, and all the mainstream stuff tends to be tragedies already, so it's kind of nice to have a, when you're going into the romance, you kind of expect it to be happy because you're looking for like that safe spot to express your sexuality, and to go in and have it be a tragedy is kind of like, whoa, I was here for like a good time.
Well, I think in the 1950s, when Pulp Fiction came out and Peebo Brinker and books like that, lesbians always either died at the end or they went back to their husbands. And I think we are way past those kinds of romances now,
Any other last questions before we conclude? Well, I want to say thank you to the panel and thank you very much to everybody for attending. Thank you very much.
Thank you.